Good evening, everybody out there. We have a fantastic guest this evening, Dr. Kathy Gruver. She's an award-winning writer, author. She hosts her own TV show. She's got a new book out called The Journey of Healing, which no doubt is fantastic. I read her last book, Conquer Your Stress, which was a fantastic read, a really interesting read. And she's a world-renowned speaker and lecturer. So, Kathy, welcome to the show. Great to have you, Dr. Kathy Gruver.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So, Kathy, we live in a world these days where people seem to be running around and they don't sort of stop and relax, and people are chronically in this world of they're busy, they've got their phones, their computers, they're constantly on the go. What do you think is the main cause of stress? What sort of causes people to get stressed out in this world today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the official definition of stress is a perception that demands are going to exceed your resources. So it's that feeling that that too much is coming at you that you're not going to be able to handle. But what's interesting is, we can't stop the stress. So in that regard, stress isn't really the problem because we can't control that. What we can control is our reaction to it. So it's when we start to feel hopeless, helpless, completely out of control, overwhelmed, that's really when that stress gets to us. And that's a huge problem. We're seeing so much more of it now, so much more.
And what do you think some of the causes are? What would you say? Why are we seeing this spike in stress? Is it modern technology? Is it our lifestyles? Is it a combination of all things? Why is it that, or is it more people opening up and being honest about how they feel? But why do you think we're seeing more and more people who are suffering with stress and stress-related illnesses?
Yeah, I think part of it, you're right. I think it is the technology. The fact that the second something happens, we know about it. That if a political candidate says something stupid, it's on the air in just a matter of moments. If there's a shooting somewhere, we immediately hear about it. So I think we're being inundated with all of that really negative, fear-based newscasting. And we're hearing about these natural disasters and these human-caused disasters that, 20, 30 years ago, it would have, maybe if you watched the evening news, you would have gotten it eventually. And I think there is so much pressure because now I've got a computer in my purse, so at any given moment I'm reachable, and there's that pressure of, oh, it's Sunday night at midnight, I better respond to that email, because we can. So I think we're feeling that, and I think it's just the global stress. It's no longer just what's specifically happening in our own family. I think we're feeling everything, and people are getting more in touch with that. We're talking more about stress. We're talking more about mind-body medicine and ways we can alleviate that stress, whereas 20 years ago you weren't hearing about it. So I'm glad we're having the conversation. I hope we can come up with some solutions for it, because it's affecting a lot of people.
Yeah, no, very much so. And what's your thoughts, Kathy, on our primal brain? We've got this brain, 2 million-year-old brain, or give or take a few years here and there. We're in this modern world where we don't have any saber-toothed tigers roaming most cities or town centers anyway. Yet in saying that, we've got this primal brain that's on alert, fight, flight, freeze, and I guess our mind and as a human beings, we can hypothesize and think logically as well. And I sometimes think that the two don't really merge well together, in the sense that as a human being, we're unique, we can think, we're logical, we're rational, yet in saying that we can also we can hypothesize other stuff that's not happened, or we can worry about things that don't happen. So what are your thoughts on how we can regulate our mind and take some control back over our mind? Because like you said, technology is always there, and we always see the news, and if you look at the newspapers, they always seem to report on negative stuff, and our brain seems to be very predictive. Our brain seems to be functioning in a way where survival is key, and we recognize threat, but sometimes there isn't really any threat. I mean, we react to threat, we have road rage, bills come in and deadlines, everything else. So what can we do really to sort of take control of our brain and start functioning better in this modern world?
Yeah, well, and you raise a really good point. We have this fight or flight response, which was awesome when we were running from saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah.
We'd have this short-lived dynamic stressor, and then it would go away, and our hormones would return to normal, and we'd sleep. Well, and the problem now is, we don't have these short-lived dynamic stressors. We're having these low-grade, constant stressors, which is,
Yeah.
the government's after our taxes, and, we are hearing things on the news, and we're stuck in traffic, and the kids not doing well in school, and the mother-in-law moves in because she's got Alzheimer's, and,
Yeah.
we're quickly losing our minds. Because we don't have time to let that stress response return to normal and rest. So I think what we have to remember, and I sort of touched on this earlier, is we can't control that stress. Can't control the person in traffic
Yeah.
that's going too slow,
Of
or that
course.
we have to pay taxes. What we can control is our response to that. And I think,
Yes.
first of all, being aware that we can't control those things is huge.
Yeah.
Because
No.
we're going to drive ourselves crazy trying to control all the stuff we can't, when we need to just focus on what's happening in our own minds. And the downside of being this rational, thinking human is we're the only species that can create stress in our own minds. We can dwell on things from the past. We can worry about things in the future. And the cheetah's not doing that. The cheetah doesn't sit down with his buddy and go, dude, I'm sorry I missed that elk
Yeah.
yesterday, man. I was having a bad day, and the girl cheetah wouldn't talk to me, and I'm feeling a little fluffy because it's my time of the month, and the cheetahs don't have this conversation. That's us. We dwell, we regret, we worry. We're the only animals that do that. So in looking at that, we have to just try to control our thoughts, which we can do with so many tools: meditation, visualization, affirmations, mindfulness, cognitive restructuring, cognitive behavioral therapy, dance, exercise. We have unlimited options, and I think we just have to be aware, make a different choice, and then act on that choice to make change.
Yeah, very much so. I've often compared it to like a piece of paper, where if you get a piece of paper and you rip one piece, you don't really notice it, but if you rip two pieces, three pieces, then before you know it, you end up with a mess, really. Or like a bottle of pop, fizzy pop, where you shake it and all of a sudden it explodes. And I think for the most part, most people, most people don't do what you say, in the sense that they kind of keep going and it creeps up on them, really. Because I think as human beings, we're quite resilient in many ways. I think we can sort of cope with a lot of things, but I think it's all the other things that sort of happen as well that tends to tip us over the edge, really, from a stress response. But I certainly agree with what you say. In what I do, I have rituals that I do. I get up in the morning with gratitude list. I go for a walk. I meditate. I question the validity of some of my thoughts when I'm getting stressed out of things, and I become in tune with my own mind, and I work on a conscious and unconscious level, mindfulness, and many techniques that I use to keep that focus and keep that emotional well-being, and keep myself emotionally on a level where I feel happy and content. Obviously, in life, you're going to have ups and downs, and you're going to have periods where you don't feel so great, but the aim is not to stay there. So, having read your book, it was quite interesting. You share some of the same philosophies as myself, really. And obviously, we can't control a lot of things. We can't control the weather, can't control our taxes, can't control bills, but we can control our thoughts. And what I like about your book, it is quite user-friendly, easy to understand. Anyone can literally pick the book up. It's literally jargon-free, in the sense that it's easy to understand for anybody. And I like the way it's structured. And you offer various ways and techniques and strategies that are quite broad. There's mindfulness, there's meditation, there's visualization. You talk about restructuring and distorted thinking as well, or cognitive distortions anyway. So what would you recommend? Obviously, we're not going to be able to, each case is based on formulation, and it's purely educational seminar. We're not treating anybody, but in terms of, what can people do? Is there anything that they can do to relieve that stress and decompress and get themselves to a better state emotionally? Are there anything that you would suggest people could do through your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually touched on it, because I put so many things in the book, and that's why. Because we're all biologically and mentally and spiritually and emotionally individual, and I really hate cookie cutter medicine. That's the only problem I have with our modern Western medicine, is it's just so
Yeah.
everybody gets the same basic thing, and that doesn't work for everybody. I exercise by doing dance and flying trapeze.
Yeah.
Most people aren't going to exercise that way. That's
Yeah.
what works for me. That's what fuels me. So that's why
Yeah.
I put so many different things in the book. If you don't like meditation, geez, I even talk about kind of fringe things like sound healing and color healing and chakras and past life regression, and
Yeah.
and not everybody appreciates those things. Totally cool. It's a buffet. Take what you want and then leave the rest behind. If you don't jive with past life regression, don't do it. But I wanted to give people options. So that's the first thing, is really just, explore options, whether it's in my book or you Google stuff, or you talk to people about what they do, and then see what works for you. And it's so funny. I see people all the time they say to me all the time, "Oh, I guess I should be doing yoga." And I say, "Why?" Because your aunt does it, because you heard it on TV, because you read, like, why do you think you should be doing yoga? Well, it's good for you. Yeah, but there's a lot of things that are good for you. I don't particularly like yoga. It hurts my back. So I do other things. The very basic thing, though, is we have to understand that we're having a stress response. We have to identify what that looks like to us. Are we clenching our jaw? Are we not sleeping? Are we eating too much? Are we suddenly completely constipated? Are we, I think so many of us, and I love hearing those rituals you do in the morning because they just sound amazing. So many people are completely void of an idea of their own self. So when they are feeling stressed, they don't even know it. So I think the first thing is awareness of, wow, I've reached my limit of my personal stress resilience and I'm over the edge. Now what do we do about it? And I think just simple breathing. I think there's some really simple meditations that people can do, even if they're not meditators, even if they can't sit on the pillow and do that for 45 minutes. There's really simple stuff. I teach the mini meditation in the book, which is just my favorite technique. And changing our mind, using things like affirmations and visualization. To me, those are kind of the 4 keys of the simplest things you can do. And then once you get that base down, then let's build on it and let's get into some more complicated techniques, or where you bring another practitioner in. But I think awareness and then making those simple choices is the key.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I have a heart monitor too. I've got it on now. Went out for a walk earlier. It's a lovely evening over here. A spring evening. I went out for a nice long walk, and I also use an app which gives you an idea what the breathing ratio is and breathing exercises. So I make a conscious effort as well. We're all human beings, and whether you're a therapist, whatever experience you've got, whatever we do, we all like you said, stress is unavoidable. The key thing is to be proactive and do different things consciously and unconsciously too, to go forward. Because I think if we're in a good place mentally, emotionally, then our best work is done. I think if we're always on that fight, flight, freeze, and we're always, chronically stressed, it makes it hard. And also life, whatever we believe, life is in this genetic form anyway. There never has been, there never will be. There's none of us really. It's short, and really want to enjoy life. To enjoy life, I think it's really important that we manage and get that emotional well-being, really, because what is life really about? I think if we're not enjoying ourselves, we're not going about doing things, and because of our fear response, I think sometimes it can make life challenging for people. And I think the interesting thing is there what you say. I mean, you mentioned many techniques that pretty much anyone can do. Meditation, whether you consider it spiritual meditation or just decompressing, mindfulness, walking produces exercise, produces chemicals in the brain, doing things that you enjoy doing exercise-wise, playing sports. So all these things are accessible to everybody. I think the other thing too, which is good, and I read in the book too, was the cognitive restructuring and also questioning the validity of our thoughts, because as well as the bills and the pressure at work and all these things, we've got these life events, and these life events, Kathy, we can't always control. Well, we can't control any, the majority of our life events. We can influence them, obviously, but we can't control relationships. We can't control work situations. But what about situations where people are facing redundancy or they're breaking up in a marriage or relationship? And what can they do in terms of the stress and pressure they face from them situations to keep proactive and keep productive and keep in a good place if they do have that situation where it could be anything really? I know we all got different levels of resilience, but let's say someone is facing 3 or 4 events that have spiraled, and what can they do really to get their mind back and get themselves back on track?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we can't control those outside things, especially when it's a relationship or a job where it's someone else's decision. If your husband comes home and says, "I'm leaving," boy, you talk about being out of control. And that's a really good time to bring in another person, I think. There are certain times where, you can sit by yourself and think all you want, and sometimes having a third person or someone else to bounce things off of, you really need to get those feelings out. Because I have found that people who stuff their feelings, they grip onto those emotions and they don't express them, however that is for you. end up kind of living in the disease, living in the body and turning into some sort of disease or exacerbating your disease or leading to more pain. So getting those feelings out, processing those feelings, I think is so fantastically important. And also giving yourself space. I don't think, at least here in the States, we don't give ourselves enough space to feel things. You know, it's like, oh, I'm just going to power through and, you know, we just do this type of, I do this type A thing of I'm just going to just deal with it, and we throw it aside and we go to bowling or we have to take time to actually feel these things, because if we don't, it's going to come out somewhere else, because it has to come out. So I would rather have it come out in, you know, expressing my feelings to a girlfriend than getting the flu later or cancer later, or, you know, not saying we cause our own illness. I would never say that. But we do know that emotions are held in our body.
Of course, yeah.
That can, yeah, and it depletes our immune system, which allows disease and dysfunction to take hold of us. So I think getting stuff out is just the most fabulous thing. And then once you're through that initial trauma, then let's take the space to breathe, to do affirmations. I am worthy and fabulous. I am beautiful and sexy. I am prosperous and abundant. I'm surrounded by people who love me. You know, those actually shift the function of our brain. They change everything to a positive mindset, because once we start to spiral into that negative, it leads to more and more negative. So if you're in a relationship that ended and you feel terrible, even if you don't believe it yet, start doing affirmations. That's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the thing is, like, emotions, they have a big impact on us, like you said. And you've only got to look at, say, if someone's embarrassed, they blush automatically. Emotions sometimes can cause skin rash and hives, and emotions have a big impact on us physiologically, and mind and body. There's connection there, and as you say, eventually, if we're in a negative emotional state, if nothing else, the quality of our life diminishes, really, life in general. I mean, what's life about if you can't experience life and be happy and be joyous? And life can be really beautiful, but it can also be quite painful too. But I guess with the pain, like you said, is getting over that trauma. And I had a client, to give you an example, about a year ago, and she'd been married for 40 or so years, Kathy, you know, and her husband decided that was it. He'd found somebody else, and for 2 years she was literally social avoidance. She tried all the motivational seminars, she tried all these different types of things to get her willpower back up, but every time she got her willpower, there'd be something somewhere that would bring her back in that negative state, and she was avoiding the outside world. And we sort of looked at her thought process and examined, because obviously different people will perceive different events differently. You know, you've got 3 people, same event, same circumstances. One's going to be neutral, one's going to be positive, one's going to be somewhere down the other side, anxious, devastated, whatever, really. And her perception of the events, and when we talked about the situation, and what was bringing it to her head was that there was a wedding, her daughter's wedding was coming up, and he was going to be there with his new partner, and she couldn't face it, and she felt anxious and devastated. When we sort of talked about it for the first time and rationalized it, she realized that she was personalizing it, she was blaming, and all these different things, really, and she wasn't doing herself any good. And really, it was just untangling all those thoughts and moving forward. And by doing that, it lessened the emotional intensity, and we give her a plan, behavioral strategies, got to meditate, walk, and give her a few techniques here and there to work with. But the key for her, I think, at least, was to question the validity of her thoughts. And the illusion she had, she was going to spend the rest of her life, and which is fair enough. People do think that way, but obviously other people think differently. And what do? Do you just avoid society and lock yourself up, because you're going to suffer if you do that? But if you get control of your thoughts again and start moving forward, and it didn't take her a long time really to get back into the swing of things and get her life back and go forward. She had her moments, her wobbles here and there, yet in saying that, she could move forward. So I see the value in the process you use and questioning our thoughts, the validity of our thoughts. Because sometimes we might believe one thing, but life being the way it is, we give meaning to it. What does life really mean? In esoterically, we're going to go deep and meaningful. What does life mean? But what's your approach? You've got people who've gone through a situation of trauma. What's your general approach in terms of moving them forward and start to get their life back when they've gone through a significant emotional event and they seem to be powerless and stuck on the old narrative? And how can we start moving them forward, do you think?
Well, I like the fact that you said you started to examine the validity of people's thoughts. There's really, if we want to break it down and get esoteric, there's really just events. That's it.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
deem whether they're positive or negative. That breakup might be the best thing that ever happened to her.
Yes.
Losing that job, I can look back at events in throughout my life, and I've not been on this planet, tons of time, but in my time on this planet,
Yeah.
I can say I look back at things that I thought at the time were horrible. Why'd that boy break up with me? Why didn't I get that part in the
Yeah.
play? Why did I lose that job? Why didn't this work? And I can look back at those events now and go, oh, that's why. It's so clear that that was opening up another door
Mhm.
or teaching me a lesson or giving me the knowledge to help somebody else through that problem. Um,
Mhm.
so I really try to just look at events as events, because ultimately I don't know what that universal plan is and where that's going to lead
Yeah.
into my development and my evolution. So I try to stress that to people. It's really hard if the person says, my husband left me yesterday. You want to be
Yes, of
sympathetic
course.
to that. You can't be like, oh, well, move on. You want to
Yeah.
give the person time to grieve that. In fact, I have a client who lost a child. I
Mhm.
can't imagine what it's like to lose a child. Never been through that. But it's now been about 4 years. And
Mhm.
she was saying that when people ask her how many children she has, she'll typically say 4, but I lost one when he was 7.
Mhm.
And I said, okay. And she says, she feels like she's honoring him and blah, blah, blah. And we had this whole conversation about what is her intention behind saying that. I said,
Mhm.
because that completely shifts the concept of this conversation to, oh my gosh, she lost a child. Um, and I said,
Mhm.
look at your motivation for saying that to people. And I said, I said, I'm not accusing you. I said, but are you looking for attention?
Yeah.
Are you making that your identity? As Carolyn
Yeah.
May said, our biography becomes our biology. I said, are you
Mhm.
saying it because you think that person can relate to you? I said, what do you want out of mentioning that to people? I said, because the
Mhm.
lady at the meat counter, the 2-second exchange, that might not be the place to have that conversation.
Yes, of
And I said,
course. Yeah.
I'm not telling you not to grieve the way you do. I said, but look at your motivation before you open your mouth to express that you lost a child. And she thought about it for a second. She goes, yeah, I really have made that my identity.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think on some level that's really dangerous, because then that does get stuck in our biology, it gets stuck in our bodies. And how do we move past that if
Yeah.
that's who we are? I'm an actress, I'm a wife, I'm a dentist, someday those things are going to end. And then
Yes.
who are you?
Yeah.
So I think we have to, like, talk about what is the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? Who are we if we shed all those labels? I think that's really important to look at, and to look at the situation and say, I will get out of the other side of this and look back at it. It'll probably be something that moves me forward.
Yes, I agree. It's almost like we live this illusion to a certain extent where we tend to think tomorrow will be a better day, and we generally don't tend to live in the now, at least in our Western world and or probably around the world these days. And we tend to focus on when we have that car, when we have that relationship, we have that job, and we kind of wish our life or we go on vacation. These things are great. I set goals. I love setting goals, but I'm also mindful that I live in the now too, because the best chance of getting the goal is living in the now. And also, now is the only moment we have for sure, and it's teaching people that as well. And like I said, it's a very challenging situation. My deepest empathy goes out to people and who've lost people, and losing a child, no doubt. Couldn't imagine how difficult that would be, and empathy goes out to them for sure. But like you said, I think in certain situations, at least in my experience, I think sometimes we can tie ourselves to, in almost any situation, to a narrative. And certainly in the case of the woman I mentioned that I was working with, who'd been divorced or separated for at least 2 years, it was almost like she was in a denial phase. She was still denying and blaming, and she'd gone through a range of emotions and grieving and many various emotions, but she was bouncing back that denial. And really, at that point of acceptance, we accept what we are. We can't control the situation. People get in a situation, Kathy, where they blame. It's his fault, her fault. And
Mhm.
really, it's a perfect storm, isn't it? It's not really anyone's fault, just life being the way it is. That's life. We have ups and downs, really, and get to that place of acceptance. So, what are your thoughts on people getting to that place where they accept the situation or the event for what it is and say, you know what, it's time to put the line in the sand and start moving forward? Do you think it takes people time to do that? Do you think what sort of ways can we move people forward to accept the situation, what it is, and start moving forward? Kathy, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's so many different ideas on how much time you're supposed to take for
Yeah.
grieving. It's, what did they say, a month for every year you've been in the relationship or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different way of doing that, and I would never tell anybody their way of grieving is wrong.
Yeah.
I lost my mom when I was 18, but because she was sick for so long, it wasn't like this boom died thing. It was this slow build to it. So it had a really different effect on me than if she was struck by a car and never came home. We knew she was dying. It took 8 years. So it wasn't a surprise. And on one hand, it was kind of like, oh, good, she's in a better place. She's out of pain. So I think so much of it is situational. And, I grieved the best I could as an 18-year-old, and it was pretty bad. So I got to grieve again when I was 26. Because I didn't do it right the first time. I think it's a progressive thing, and different things pop up at different times that are going to affect how we grieve. There's a woman that I was talking about that lost a child. She's got 3 other kids. So she's torn between this, keep his memory alive for the kids, even though she might be ready to move on. She's trying to balance what her husband thinks and what the kids think and what she needs. And I see her struggling with that because it's not just her. It's all these other people. So I think, finding a way to honor that, whether it's a relationship. There was a really beautiful ritual that I used to do. It's called a cord cutting ceremony, where you would actually, whether it was a relationship or a death, you would get a bunch of different colored ribbons, and you would see what those ribbons represented. The blue one is their compassion, the red one is the happiness and the joy, and you would actually cut those cords, and then do this whole ritual surrounding, basically letting them go, cutting those cords and allowing them to go free. And it was just, it's sympathetic magic. It's putting those emotions into a physical state, and we're much more comfortable with physical. We can talk about how many crunches we did and what our BMI is. We're not as good at talking about emotions. So putting those emotions into a physical ritual, whether it's burning pieces of paper or, whatever you need to do. I don't think there's a right or wrong, and I'm sure there's books that tell you there is, or a therapist that would tell you there is, but it's such an individual journey of losing relationships, and because part of ourselves goes with it, so I think it again goes back to, who are you without the job, the spouse, the kid, the parent, who are you, who are you at your essence, and how do you make that thrive?
Yeah, no, very much so. I agree entirely. With yourself, really, each case is based on its own formulation, really. There's no right or wrong. And I suppose in the end, it goes back to what the person wants and what outcome they're looking for in terms of that they want to move forward. There's that challenge, really, in being sensitive and empathic to people, but also being firm in terms of being there and making sure that they are moving forward too. Like you said, it all depends on the timing and what the situation meant for them and where they are in relation to their own life. And life goes on, and we live to the best of our ability, and all these things are happening around us that we have little or no control over. Life carries on. We keep going, and we keep going forward. I think what's really interesting, that was a wonderful technique you mentioned there, a wonderful process, and I think it would be great if they could introduce some of these things. I don't know about school for you, but certainly when I was going to school, and these days I do some talks in schools, and I'd love to see certain things brought into schools where younger people could at least understand some tools or some techniques. And one of my goals, Kathy, is to introduce the CBT ABC model in as many schools as possible, so people have got some sort of awareness and understanding cognitive distortions. And I think by doing that, at least they become more aware of how they can be more proactive in terms of their own well-being and understand their thought process a bit better and manage situations better, really. But what are your thoughts in maybe introducing these things early on in life? So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, geez, I wish I knew all this stuff at like 15. My life would be not different, but I would have handled it so much better. I came to this stuff later. When I finished my PhD and I had to pick a topic for a dissertation, I realized that I really liked the mind-body stuff. So it wasn't until 2011 that I actually even really started working with these techniques after my tax audit, after my first divorce, after my
Yeah.
mother passed, after, you
Yeah.
know, and what did I joked with someone the other day, we just had, today is our tax day, or tomorrow's our tax day here in the States. And I said,
Yeah.
you know, thank God I learned trig and algebra, because that came in so handy in real life. I use that so many times today. You know, they don't talk about communication or relationships or stress or
Yeah.
finding a job or balancing a checkbook or doing taxes or, you know, raising kids, you know, all this stuff that we actually need to be learning, because we're not getting it from home. You know, we're mimicking how our parents handled their stress, and the
Yeah.
generation coming up behind me is probably getting better at it, because you and I now have these techniques that we can pass on to the younger kids. But man, my parents didn't know anything about stress or talk about stress, or, you know, I think if kids would learn to meditate and they would learn
Yeah.
CBT, and, you know, I think that would be, I think it would be fabulous. And I've thought about trying to get in some of the schools here locally. I'm in Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
California, where we have, you know, tons of grade schools, tons of high schools. I think it would be so great, because the kids really need this. It would be, man, geez, I wish I would have had it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think so. And, you know, I think if we have that, we certainly see better coping strategies. I think the coping strategies the young people have got are improving. People like us, we're out there and sharing the knowledge is out there. They can download stuff, they can read stuff, they can learn. But I still think that it's important to get professionals going in and talking to young people, because I think they'd really appreciate or really enjoy and learning new coping strategies, where learning meditation, learning about exercise, learning about their own thought process. I certainly think that make a big impact in the world. I think we'd have less antisocial behaviour, would have less health harming, less eating issues and disorders. And I'm not saying you know, sort everything out, but I'm sure that we'd have a big impact in the world, really, because really in the end, a lot of the problems that we have in the world are the way we perceive events, the way we perceive situations. And the world, the way it is at the moment, we're going through a time of uncertainty in one sense, and that's going to bring a lot more stress for people too, whereas in the past we had pretty much things mapped out. You go to uni and you got that job, and things have changed dramatically. You know, the world's a different place, and these days the world's much more competitive. There's people around the world, anywhere in the world, who can go on the internet and start trading and start a business, really. So competition is fierce, really, and jobs have changed, dynamics changed. And interesting you said there about, you know, the past generations, and I think that one of the things about past generation was that, like you said, for me, at least in my opinion, if anyone talked about stress or anything to do mentally, it was like, you know, get on with it. It's a sign of weakness. Where it's amazing when you think about it, where if someone breaks their leg, it's acceptable to go in to see a doctor or a hospital. If someone has diabetes, it's fine. But mental health at the moment, whilst it's improving, I still think that we've got a long way to go in accepting it's a massive, huge part of people's dynamic, really, how we function mentally. I still think that we're a long way to go in terms of how we recognize and appreciate the impact it has on us physically, mentally, our well-being, really. What are your thoughts on that, Kathy, in terms of where we are as a society in recognizing, you know, mental health, stress, and yeah,
Yeah, I think we're getting there.
yeah,
It's funny, you know, every year when I go to my primary care doctor, I get this 5-page form to fill out, and it wants to know what I'm eating, and am I smoking
yeah,
crack, and is my husband beating me, and, you know,
yeah,
but they never ask about stress. To me, if they asked about stress, they would understand why I'm smoking so much crack. You know,
right, yeah,
I'm kidding, of course, but, you know, it's like they don't ask about that mental health stuff. You know,
yeah,
we're not there as close as I'd like to be, but I have to say, when I studied so much of the techniques that I use and that I put in the book, and I studied with Herbert Benson at the Benson Henry Institute of Mind Body Medicine at Harvard, and
yeah,
it was so neat because I was in this huge conference room with, you know, 125 physicians, and by the end of this week-long course, all of them said they were returning these techniques to their clinic, to their office, to their practice, to their hospital, to their center, and these were people from all over the world that had joined in for a week of mind-body medicine, and how we can share this with kids and AIDS patients and cancer patients and
yeah,
teens and seniors. And, you know, and it was so exciting to me to see so many mainstream Western medicine doctors say, I got to start teaching people this. And if that keeps radiating out, it's my dream that doctors prescribe meditation instead of medication. And I think we're getting there. I think we're seeing more people talking about stress reduction. It's not just, oh, you have an ulcer, are you stressed? It's, oh, you have everything, are you stressed? And so I think it's coming. And I see a lot of a lot of TV professional doctors, if that makes sense, talking about stress and bringing in stress experts. And, I've done like 250 radio and TV shows, mostly about stress, some nutrition, some massage, but clearly there's an interest in it. I'm seeing queries and people asking all the time for stress-related guests and stress-related articles. So we're getting the word out. We've got a ways to go. Not everybody's meditating yet. I hope we get there, because now that I meditate, I get it. People for years have said, you should meditate. I'm thinking you should be quiet. And now I understand why. Had someone said, here's why you should meditate, I think I would have been more apt to do it. But I do now, and I'm getting good at it, which is exciting for me, because I used to be terrible at it. I used to be so bad, and now I'm into it. I love it. If I don't get to meditate every day, I'm like, oh, So it's getting there. We're getting there. We're getting closer.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point, Kathy. I'm really glad you made that point. People listening out there, and they can hear that, because I had the same experience. Whenever I run courses and I do lectures and I do interviews, I talk about meditation, and I've been meditating now for many, many years, and it's taken me a while to get to the stage I'm at. And even now, sometimes I'll meditate and it won't go like I wanted to go. So I'm glad, you said that, because people listening out there, they tend to think that you can just do it automatically all the time. And I got to the point where I can pretty much switch off during the day for half an hour, But it's taken me a while to get there. In the beginning, I used to struggle. I used to struggle in 5 minutes, just lying there, forces coming to my mind, and I'd battle them, and I shouldn't be lying down, I should be out there. And like I said, it takes time. And I started off by, the goal was 5 minutes. I got there, then 5 minutes became 10, 15, 20, and now up to about an hour, even more some days. And like it says, after an hour of meditation, I feel better than sleeping for 8 hours. I really do. It feels fantastic. Any stress I have is completely gone, and it's phenomenal. I have audios too. I do hypnosis as well, and I do self-hypnosis too. And it's really, really powerful stuff. And even to the point where I've actually done experiments myself. I've put the heart rate monitor on and the blood pressure monitor on. And you can easily, I've had situations where the blood pressure has gone up to about, say, 135 over 90 during the day when I have a really, really busy day and a number of clients and I've been running around. I meditate and I'm down to about 120 over 80. It's incredible, really, how powerful it is. And it really is. And whenever I teach organizations, I actually bring in heart rate monitor and blood pressure monitor just for them to see just, how powerful it is. But you made a really good point there, and you sort of, which I want to touch on, because a while ago, I had a patient come to see me. It was for anxiety, severe anxiety she had, and she'd been to many other therapists in the past, and I couldn't really think of what I could do different. I looked at her case, I looked at her notes, and I thought, what can I do different? There wasn't a great deal I could think of, really, from what I saw. I had a thought, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give you a food diary. I'm going to take that away. And she said, what's food diary going to do with anxiety? I said, I just want to take it away and bring it back in a week, and just let's see what happens. She brings it back, and I look at the diary. She's having like 8, 9 cups of coffee a day. And I said, I'm sorry, there's very little I can do for you. And she was adamant, Kathy, that it had nothing to do with anxiety. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a behavioral experiment. I'm going to get a blood pressure monitor out, the heart rate monitor out, and say, you know what, without any coffee, let's see your pulse rate, and then have your 2 cups of whatever you have, and we'll see how much higher it goes in 15 minutes. And it proved to us, and that did the trick, really. Just we worked on that anyway to bring that down, because that was a big part of it. What about the nutrition side? What do you think about that in terms of our stress and well-being, anxiety? How much of an impact does that have?
Oh, so huge. In fact, what you just said is so brilliant, because I have a threefold perspective on health. And the first step is get rid of things that are causing problems, like 8 cups of coffee a day. The second thing is, let's add stuff back in that we need that we might not be getting. Maybe it's magnesium, maybe it's more water, maybe, and then the third thing is, let's put other stuff on top of it. Because I'm sure people suggested, oh, you should get on antidepressants. Well,
Yes.
that's not going to help if you're still drinking 8 cups of coffee a day. And that's,
Exactly.
let's get to the root cause. You can either take an Advil or you can stop hitting yourself with a hammer, whatever
Yeah.
you choose. So that's just the perfect intro to that. Get rid of the stuff that's causing the problem. We have to identify that first, and sometimes that takes detective work. Then let's put those things back in. And I'm a huge fan of magnesium. It's my favorite mineral because I have a favorite mineral. But no, I think nutrition's huge. And some of the other things that cause anxiety are MSG and artificial sweetener and artificial colors. It's so funny. I don't think I told the story in the stress book about M&Ms. I was noticing that I was having asthma attacks certain nights of the week. And I thought, well, that's weird. So I started to pay attention, and I noticed I was having asthma on nights I came back to my office. I thought, that's weird. I'm in my office all day. Well, I realized I would finish dinner with my husband, and as I walked out the door to come back to my office, I'd grab a handful of M&Ms, pop them in my mouth. And I thought, that's weird. I've been eating M&Ms my entire life. So I separated them out by color, which my husband thought was very weird. And so each night when I would leave my office, I would grab a specific color of M&Ms. And if I had brown, I was fine. If I had yellow, I was fine. If I had the blue, the red, or the orange, I had an asthma attack that night. Clearly, I was having some problem with the dye in the candy. No doctor is ever going to figure that out for me. That was totally a self-experiment. So I think you have to, and I love food diaries, huge fan of food diaries. So I think that was right on. I mean, we have to look at what we're putting in our body, our mind, our soul, because that's going to affect us. And we can't think that, that we can just eat and drink whatever we want and it's not going to affect us. That's wrong. It's our fuel. We have to.
No, I agree. And I think that, I suppose it's step by step in terms of, I mean, the way I tend to have I have a juice in the morning. I go green, and I have a green juice, a green smoothie in the morning, and at least during the week, my goal is to eat well and eat vegetables and greens. And on the weekend, I kind of a bit more lenient, really. But like you said, really for me, and what worked really well for me was cutting processed foods out and getting rid of gluten, getting rid of cutting down on sugar, other than sugar in fruit, which is different to processed sugar. But the thing is, really, I always recommend the patients I see, if they can, to see a nutritionist or take something on board, really, in terms of what they're eating, because it is a holistic process, really. I think you can do all the stuff you want with the mind, but if you're going away and you're eating processed food and food with low nutritional values, and the body's going to constantly crave, energy and nutrition, really. So I think it's really important too for people to bear that in mind too, at least for stress and anxiety and mood and mindset. But you made a really good point there that I agree with too, in terms of the medication side of things. And it's not my position to tell people that shouldn't do in terms of medication, but I really think sometimes people, they're afraid of experiencing the emotion. They're afraid of feeling, it's like, and I tell people, if you're gonna, medication, the potential is you're gonna, you eradicate one emotion, but you also eradicate these good emotions too. So you become this walking, potentially this walking zombie, you don't feel anymore. So what people do is their call. I don't advise people what they shouldn't do, really. It's their life. But I really think it's important to understand that feeling is a perfect part of life. We are going to feel down. We are going to feel angry, sad, but embracing it, this too shall pass. Nothing lasts forever. But also understanding ourselves. And I'd love to see that brought into schools. I'd love to see young people educated on emotional well-being, and then we get educated that events are going to happen, things are going to happen. You're going to feel certain ways for one reason or the other, and it's fine to feel that way. Dig deep, and sometimes you've got to connect to your feeling. And people say to me, I do a lot of motivational talks and seminars, and I get whenever I go on radio and shows, they say, "Are you ever downbeat?" I'm like, well, obviously, I'm a human being, I won't say what else I'm thinking in my mind, but the thing is, and the point I make to them is that I don't stay there for longer than I need to. In the past, years ago, I used to stay there for months, then it became weeks, and it became hours. Now, I have what I call a 90-second rule. I won't stay there for longer than that period unless I feel I need to connect with an emotion, understand the situation better. But I really think it's important to educate people, like you says, in emotion, and understand that emotions are warning signals. They're attached to values, attached to beliefs, they're attached to our thoughts, and the more we communicate with them, the better place we'll be in terms of our perception of these events really that control our life. So your thoughts on emotional, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I'm actually doing a course right now through the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Edgar Cayce was the sleeping prophet, who they're based out of Virginia Beach, and it's a kind of like fulfilling life, create your own success kind of course. And I'm taking it because I'm actually teaching something similar later, and wanted to see if there was any good techniques that I could also share. And one thing the instructor said in the video I watched last night was, people say, you know, God doesn't talk to us anymore. It used to be that he'd come down through an angel and he'd speak, you know, not meaning this anthropomorphic God, but this, you know, source or universal consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And God had expressed to whoever asked that question, yes, I speak through your emotions now. You're just not used to hearing them. And the guy said, you know, if you're an accountant and every day you show up to work and go, oh, here I am about to be an accountant, maybe you shouldn't be an accountant. You know, maybe that is God. That's your higher self saying, you shouldn't be doing this. We all have temporary things. We all have jobs we didn't like. We all have moments where we don't like even the best job. But if it's this pervasive emotion about a person, a job, a school, a class, try to make a different choice. And you know, we have these emotions. Some people feel deeper than others. And I think a lot of that is we weren't taught how to handle those emotions. But I had a client come in, and I do work with Bach flower essences, which I love. You know, I think there's 36 flowers that deal with a different emotional state, and they're beautiful. They're made pretty much homeopathically. There's nothing chemical in them. And I had a client who desperately wanted to get off antidepressants, and she said, could Bach flower essences help? And I said, well, let's start with this. Why are you on antidepressants? Because I do believe there are some people that do have a chemical imbalance that need to be medicated for a little bit, for a longer, you know, you give me a schizophrenic, I'm probably going to put him on a medication. Well, I'm not, but, you know. And I said, well, why are you on antidepressants? And she said, oh, my doctor told me to. And I said, okay, was this a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or this was just a doctor? She goes, no, it was just my doctor. I said, okay, are you doing any therapy along with it? No, which I disagree with. And I said, well, what happened that you got on antidepressants? And she said, well, my husband left. My kid was diagnosed with ADD. My grandmother died. I lost my job. And I just had a lumpectomy for cancer. And I said, well, good Lord, woman, of course you're depressed. I mean, like, those are life situations. If you weren't depressed, I'd think you were nuts. You know, it's a situational thing. You know, the dog dies, you're sad. You don't medicate that, you know. And she said, yeah, you know, I figured I'd snap out of it eventually. But she had been on the antidepressants, in her own estimation, way too long and didn't know how to stop. She was then afraid of this cascade of emotions coming back and that she wouldn't be able to handle it. So she talked to her doctor. Of course, you don't ever want to just stop antidepressants. She started weaning off of those. She started upping magnesium, essential fish oils, SAM-E, and doing the Bach flower essences. And she was able to kind of, you know, switch it so that the antidepressants went down, the natural stuff went up, and she felt fabulous because she was ready. You know, if someone tells me they tried to kill themselves and they'd like to get off their antidepressants, we're going to have a very long talk about that. You know, it's a situational thing. You want to be really just reasonable and rational about the choices you're making. And I am not opposed to Western medicine. I think I'm so glad we have it. I'd like to see it used differently, and I'd like to see it used in concert with natural stuff. You know, you can't fix everything in your house with a hammer. Sometimes you need a screwdriver, you know, so let's look at the tools we have and really pull from that toolbox and use what's going to be the best for us, you know, in each circumstance.
Yeah, very much so, because eventually you're going to find something, if you look for it, that's going to work for you. And whether it's meditating, whether it's doing some therapy, whether it's exercising, or combining all things together, really, eventually you're going to find. But I think what's really good about your approach too, quite similar to myself, you talk about, you have a philosophy as well. And I think that it's really important to have some sort of philosophy in terms of how we see the world, how we perceive events and everything else, really. Because I think that some therapists, in my experience anyway, Kathy, they're quite protocol-based. They're not flexible in terms of going out of the protocol, and they stick to that protocol and they're quite rigid in doing that. And I think it's really important to have some sort of philosophy. Like you said there, really, the woman who's gone through all those events, really, how can anyone we don't know why things happen. It's hard to rationalize, understand that. And I think it's really good. Just someone, a professional, saying to someone that it's normal to be that way. And many people have said to me, Jim, just you telling me that I'm okay, there's nothing wrong with me, feeling this way has been a bit of reassurance and made me realise that I can get better, I can improve. And I think that life and philosophy and the way we see the world and events is really important, because we've got all these things we've got these rules in the world that we live in. We've been given all these rules about how life should be, how we should live, what we should have. And really, when you think about it, it's all almost a fictional existence. And don't get me wrong, I do aspire to having nice things. I do live to rules. Socially, I do have aspirations and everything else really. But sometimes I think the key thing is not to take it overly serious, in the sense that we can sort of get caught up in it all and forget, let's look at the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture really? And do what you said before, have that philosophy where, we lose a relationship, we lose a job, and the chances are we lose it in 3 or 4 months, 5 years later, we think it's the best thing that could have happened really. So having that sort of philosophy is key, but obviously each individual is different, and depending where they are in their progress and program is where that shared philosophy is key. And I tend to do that in the way of story. I think storytelling is an indirect way and a passive way to help people move forward, really, especially when they're stuck in that narrative. Giving them alternatives and options to move forward, I think, is quite useful, really, especially with people who are really, really stuck and can't see a way out. Sharing story and sharing experiences of people who have got better, they do improve. We can improve. Anything's possible, really. We put our mind to it. It's just taking one step at a time, really, to go forward. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and it's so funny. A couple of years back, my husband and I went through a tax audit where they looked at an entire year of every income, every receipt, it was so stressful. It was such a nightmare. And somebody said to me, Kathy, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Yeah. And I said, well, the worst thing that's going to happen is we owe money. She said, okay, there's no debtors' prisons anymore. They're not going to hang you up in the square. People aren't going to mock you and throw fruit at you. You're going to pay them. She said, what if you can't pay them? And I said, well, I guess I get on a payment plan. She goes, okay, well, that would stink. But if that's the worst thing that happens, and it was such a neat lesson for me, because I realized it's not going to take the love I feel for my husband. It's not going to take my cats. It's not going to take my sense of humor. It's not going to take my essence. It's going to take some money. Yeah. And then I'll make more. It was this realistic thing of, how stressful it was. And oh my God, what if something bad happens? Okay, if something bad happens, you have a plan, and it was just such a huge life lesson. And then the comedy of it is I wrote an article on it and made money. My husband wrote an article on it and made money. So we actually made money from the tax audit, which, we turned it around. It became, we didn't need the secondary gain from that. We didn't need attention from this bad thing. We were able to turn it into a good thing. And I think that's huge too. I think a lot of people, when they have these bad things go on, they get so much attention from it that it benefits them to hang on to that negativity. It's that emotional currency that we, I'm an abused woman. I'm an alcoholic. I lost a child. So that's why I encourage that woman to question herself why she wanted to tell people that. And again, not accusing her of trying to get attention. I don't know what her intention was. But just to be aware of, why are you still hanging on to that pain? Why do you still bring up the husband from 15 years ago after he left? Why are you doing that? I think it's an important thing.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's really easy sometimes to get caught up in certain situations, like you said there, where things happen and we personalize it, and it becomes an intrinsic belief, and then we start perceiving all men are this and all women are that, and the taxation is all this, and we run that story and we hang around people who've got the same beliefs as what we have. We find something big around them, and it's a spiral that we never break out of, really. And like you said, you see people, 20 years ago they've had a tax audit, they're still talking about it now, really. Life moves on, it's okay. But I developed a technique myself personally, that's sort of like, in that, because when we're caught up in a situation, it can be quite challenging. We're caught up in it intrinsically, it's quite emotional, a lot of pressure. And I always tell people, how would you advise somebody else in the situation you're in? Because we see it from more clearer judgment, really. But sometimes what happens, we sort of like really personalize. I think we become victimized, and we just want to blow off steam, and we think we're the only one in the world going through what we're going through. And I think sometimes what I do with my clients sometimes, I say, well, if you had someone else that was going through what you're going through, what would your advice be? And that's the second a conscious step in the right direction, really. Because, you know, it's easy giving people advice sometimes, but when we're stuck in that moment, it can be quite challenging, really. But like you said, in the end, every cloud has a silver lining, and sometimes you've got to turn that adversity into a positive, really. And that's the key. As long as we're alive, we're well, we're in the game, and, you know, we're living, and life's precious, really. And you see people consumed and become this victim, really, and they lose out on so much wonderful experiences they can have in life because they get stuck in one narrative. And I also get people to write a new narrative and put underline in the old story and move the new story forward, and things like that really is to help them move forward. And just the big picture really is key for me, really, because we get stuck in situations where, if nothing else, it becomes ego-driven and, you know, identity, and it all becomes us. We get consumed in situations. I always advise anyone, look at the big picture. You know, life, we're not here for a million years. You know, it's a short, this form anyway. We just got to sometimes wake up and go for it. But time's gone really, really fast. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, the other thing is, just real quick, because I know we're almost done, is staying in the present moment. You know, the tax audit happened 15 years ago, or it's not going to happen for another 6 months. In this moment right here, where's the stress? There isn't any. You know, it's then what we're dwelling on and what we're what we're worrying about in the future. Those what ifs. What if I get audited again? What if my husband leaves? What if a cat dies? What if the dinner party I'm doing tonight is terrible? What if my soup doesn't turn out? What, you know, be here right now with whoever you're with or whatever you're with. You know, don't sit on the beach and worry about what's happening tomorrow. Be on the beach, you know, and that's the mindfulness and the meditation and all that stuff brings us right back. I think this is where we are. We don't know what's going to happen later.
No, exactly. Exactly. And I always mention to people, I mean, I set goals and I have aims and aspirations, but I also tell people that in setting these goals, I think, and so one of the things I tell people on courses and on my lectures is that whatever you want because you think it's going to make you feel better, and experience the feeling of having the goal now and control your emotions. And sometimes I think, you know, I've got this goal in mind that I want to experience, and rather than wishing my life away, I think, you know what will I feel when I've got it? How will I feel? And if nothing else, I've got a better chance of achieving it, doing that as well. And people sometimes mistake mindfulness and being in the now with not being driven, not being a goal setter. I always tell people, being mindful gives you a better chance of achieving it, but also appreciating when you get there. As in when you get there, how often the life we're living now was once a goal, and everybody, life at some point would have been a goal, and sometimes we forget, really. It's like the person who buys a new car, they buy it, and after a week it's just like any old car. And I think it's really important to, you know, embrace it, and like you said, being in the now is one of the most powerful things anyone can learn. I think the younger people can learn it. Like you said, if I learned at 15, it would have saved me so many trials and tribulations, really. But it's a wonderful wonderful gift to have, and anyone can do it, anyone can cultivate it. We can all learn to be in the now, very much so. But time's gone really, really fast, as it always does. And how can people get in touch with you, Kathy? What can they do to get in touch with you? I mean, your book's fantastic and you do some great work. And what's the best way people out there can get in touch with yourself and learn more about what you do? And
Yeah, absolutely. The best is my website, which is thealternativemedicinecabinet.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter there. It's totally free. You get a super secret health video if you do. Don't tell anybody. And I don't bug you. Get maybe once, every 2 or 3 months, I'll send one out. And all my books are there. I've got 5 books now, plus a massage DVD, a couple of different like podcasts and things like that I put together. And again, it's thealternativemedicinecabinet.com. There's links to my YouTube videos, and you can reach me through there if you have any questions. And it would be great to hear from people.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I think you've contributed wonderfully, and you've given some good ideas, and it's been a wonderful insight to the work you do, which has been fantastic. I really want to thank you and thank everyone out there watching tonight's broadcast, and hopefully we'll have you back again sometime. Thanks again. Have a fantastic rest of the weekend, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks for having me.